Also so grateful for the opportunity to debate this important issue of moorland burning today because, as I hope no one in this House will dispute, we are in a climate and nature emergency. That means we not only have a moral imperative to ban this destructive practice, but an environmental imperative, an ecological and an existential imperative to protect and restore our precious peatlands. The UK peatlands contain an estimated 3,200 million tonnes of carbon, more than the forests of the UK, France and Germany combined. There is no way that this government can tackle the climate crisis without ensuring that our peatlands continue to store this colossal quantity of carbon, and it would be an absolute catastrophe if this was to be released. And yet that is exactly what is happening. While upland peatlands should be a net carbon sink, the UK's peatlands are due to the continued mismanagement, a net source of emissions. When they could and should be used for carbon sequestration to safely store carbon, our peat bogs instead release huge quantities of CO2 into the atmosphere. The RSPB report that its equivalent amount of carbon dioxide as 140,000 cars a year. The cause of this is moorland burning. Between the 1940s to the present, there has been a 7-fold increase in burning on peatland in England alone. In Great Britain, between 2001 and 2011, burning increased at a rate of 11% per year. The more we allow this to continue, the greater we'll see the climate crisis accelerate before our eyes. And we'll also see the impacts on our environment. Britain's blanket bogs make up 10 to 15% of the world's entire resource. Burning peat bogs dries out peat soil and lowers the water table, changing the flora and fauna to advantage species like grouse, rather than transform these rich biodiverse habitats into rather than transforming these rich biodiverse habitats into naturally distorted ecologies suitable only for very few animals and plants, we have a duty to preserve their vast biodiversity. The dried peat soil also negatively impacts our water quality, releasing soil carbon into watercourses, which degrades the quality and the expense of cleaning our drinking water. That's because the burning harms the sphagnum mosses, which hold water in the peatlands. As the mosses recover, grasses and heather replace and outcompete them, which means the water runs off down the hills, taking carbon from the peat with it, leading to this polluted water. Burnt bogs are consequently less able to slow water flow, which leads to heavier flooding after rainfall. I'm sure my South Yorkshire colleagues will remember the terrible flooding our region suffered last year. 90% of the homes in the village of Fishlake near Doncaster were flooded last November, and unfortunately, over a year on, there are still some who have not been able to return to their homes. Funding for flood defences is a pressing issue, particularly when the South East gets double the funding per person than Yorkshire and Humber, and more than 5 times that of the North East. We need the government to deliver fairer funding for flood defences, but we also need to move the debate away from mitigating effects of the climate and environment emergency to tackling the causes. That means locking CO2 carbon in the ground by restoring our upland peat bogs, slowing the water flow, soaking up heavy rainfall and preventing the next flooding crisis before it occurs. Peatlands also play a vital role in the UK water security and must be protected to preserve the UK's water supply in the coming years. Researchers at Leeds University estimated that in the UK, 72.5% of the storage capacity of reservoirs in the UK is peatlands-fed water. This demonstrates the crucial role peatlands play in our water security going forward. Back in January, the Committee on Climate Change recommended that peat burning should be banned by the end of 2020. This government has routinely committed to ending the burns, but we've yet to see any legislative progress towards this. Instead, the government has only asked landowners to sign voluntary agreements not to burn, and these simply aren't working. For the sake of our environment, the government must announce an immediate ban on this destructive practice and restore our peatlands to their natural bog habitats so that they can deliver for biodiversity and carbon sequestration. But that's only the first step. Announcing the ban is not the same as enacting one. For example, in my constituency, where the moors at Stanage and Strines are both SSIs, sites of special scientific interest, which means they should be protected areas, and yet both regularly see burning. Due to the lack of proper resourcing and maintenance, too many of our protected areas are protected purely in name only. This government's record on maintaining existing areas of environmental protection shows a sustained failure to protect these protected sites. In 2010, 43% of SSIs in England were favourable condition. By 2020, this had dropped to 39%. The condition of SSIs in England are actually worse in our national parks and areas of natural beauty than outside it. This is a direct consequence of under-resourcing, underfunding conservation, yet another devastating consequence of the last 10 years of austerity. The government's own figures show the public sector spending on biodiversity in the UK has fallen from 641 million to 456 million between 2012 and 2017, a drop of 29%. The RSPB argue that the government's approach to achieving nature targets has completely failed due to neglect of basic monitoring and compliance, a reliance on voluntary approaches, and unwillingness to regulate, and dwindling public resources for action, a damning summation. As well as committing to banning peatland burning and giving a firm date on which that will come into effect, ministers must also commit to a properly resourcing conservation bodies so that they're able to monitor and clamp down on any illegal burning and ensure that peatlands are re-wetted and restored. That's why I'm so pleased to support Labour's plan for a national nature service. An expansion of spending on maintaining and restoring our peatlands is vital if we're to maintain our zero carbon commitments. But it's also a way of providing the employment stimulus we need in the wake of the pandemic, protecting and maintaining our peat bogs and our natural environment in all its diversity goes hand in hand with creating good quality public sector jobs. We should take inspiration from FDR's Civilian Conservation Corps between 1933 and 1942, workers who planted 3 billion trees and paved the way for America's system of national and state parks. They were also a central part of the New Deal. The National Nature Service should be at the heart of the Green New Deal for workers. Creating a zero-carbon army, we need to manage our moorlands effectively and lock CO2 into the ground. At the same time, it would provide a host of secure jobs and benefit many from young Black, Asian and minority ethnic workers hit hardest by this employment crisis, and also help to diversify the conservation sector. Nobody in this debate supports deregulation of moorlands, but the idea that setting fire in large swathes of our countryside is a responsible form of regulation and management I find completely incredible. It releases millions of tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere, making the emergency worse. It destroys habitats, damages ecosystem and ecologies, and as the fire rage on our uplands, they increase the threat of floods from our lowland rivers. We can't rely on the goodwill of landowners to stop burning. Just ask the residents of Headon Bridge in Calder Valley. We all saw on our TVs the damage that was done to those communities by last year's flooding as well. Many now attribute those floods to heather burning on Walshaw Moor. Instead, we need to restore and re-wet our peatlands, using them as one of the many natural solutions to the climate crisis. To do that, we must end the year-on-year cuts to spending on the environment and set out a plan for investing in nature. That means a national nature service to create well-paid, secure jobs, unionised jobs. We need to lock CO2 in the ground, protect biodiversity and fragile ecologies of our natural environment, and ensure that people who seek to burn protected peatlands face the full weight of the law. I hope the Minister will take this opportunity to outline the timetable for bringing forward legislation. It's time to end the fires, floods and climate chaos. It's well past time we banned the burn. Thank you.